The story began in a time when space exploration was almost routine. People had sent probes and ships far beyond Earth, looking for signs of life, listening for signals from faraway stars. But now in the year 2137, things were quieter. The great excitement of exploring new worlds had slowed down. Many people had grown tired of waiting for something amazing to happen. That's why what came next caught everyone by surprise. It all started with a small team of scientists working far from Earth. They were part of a project called the Europa Listening Array, a group of experts who watched the space around Jupiter's moon, Europa, and beyond. Their job was to listen carefully for any unusual signals, maybe a message from another civilization or a strange noise that could tell us something new about the universe. One of the scientists, a quiet but curious woman, was the first to notice something strange. She worked mostly at night, when the array's sensors were at their most sensitive. Her eyes flicked over the screens looking for anything unusual, when suddenly a signal appeared. It wasn't like the normal background noise or the usual signals from distant stars. This one was sharp, clear, and repeated itself over and over. At first, she thought it was a mistake, maybe a glitch in the equipment or interference from a satellite, but the signal kept coming. It was coming from a place deep in space, from the edge of the solar system, the Oort cloud, a cold and distant region filled with icy bodies and forgotten secrets. What surprised her even more was that the signal carried something that looked very familiar. It was a distress call, but not just any distress call. It was an old human emergency signal, one that hadn't been used for more than 100 years. This signal was something that shouldn't have existed anymore. The distress code was something used by a group of people from a long time ago, during a dark time in human history known as the pre-migration wars. This was a period when humanity was still fighting to find its place in the stars. Many factions or groups had clashed violently over resources, land, and survival. Most of those groups were thought to be gone, vanished without a trace. But here, coming from the deep dark of space, was a message repeating over and over. They buried a god beneath the stars, and now it dreams. This message shocked the scientist. She knew the history well, and this phrase had appeared in some old stories, myths really, told by people who believed that humanity had created something powerful and dangerous during those wars, something so strong it was almost like a god. The story said this being had been hidden away, sealed in the far reaches of space, to prevent it from causing more destruction. Now, it seemed this god might be waking up. The scientist, knowing how important this was, tried to get help, but not everyone was ready to listen. Military and government officials quickly stepped in and tried to keep the news quiet. They didn't want people to panic. They didn't want word to spread that something from the old wars might be coming back. But the scientist believed the world had a right to know. She found a way to leak the signal to a network of independent researchers and archivists, people who cared about the truth no matter the cost. Once the news got out, the internet exploded with reactions. Some called it a hoax, a trick made up by people who wanted attention. Others saw it as a warning, proof that humanity's past was not as dead as everyone hoped. For weeks, people around the world watched and waited. The scientific community debated the signal's meaning. Could it really be a message from the past? Could there be something alive or awake in the cold dark of space? Something powerful and dangerous? The story reached far beyond science. It touched something deep inside humanity, the fear of what had been lost and the hope that maybe, just maybe, the stories about the god beneath the stars were true. In the meantime, back on the Europa Listening Array, the scientist and her team continued to study the signal. They worked long hours, running tests and trying to decode any hidden information. They learned that the signal was not just a simple distress call. It contained layers of encrypted data, like a locked message waiting for the right key. The scientist felt the weight of what she was uncovering. She knew that if this was real, it could change everything, not just for the people watching from Earth, but for all humanity's place in the universe. The signal came from an area of space once used by a secret military project. Decades ago, during the last great wars on Earth, this project had tried to create weapons unlike any before, living beings with enhanced abilities, designed to end conflicts quickly but with terrifying power. Among these beings was one that had stood out. Known only as Subject R9, it was the only successful creation. A warrior unlike any other, it had ended a brutal battle in just a few hours, but after that it disappeared. Unable to control or destroy it, those in charge decided to put it away, locking it in a special prison and sending it into deep space, hoping it would never return. Now, with this SOS signal, it seemed that Subject R9 might be coming back. The government and military were afraid. They didn't want to admit it publicly, but they started to prepare for the worst. Teams were sent out in secret to reach the coordinates of the signal first, to see what was happening before it could reach Earth. Meanwhile, the scientist felt torn. She knew what this being was. A weapon created by humanity's worst instincts, a reminder of a time when people turned against each other in terrible ways. But she also knew that if this being returned, it might be the only hope against other dangers waiting in the stars. Her thoughts raced as she stared at the screens. She thought about the people who had fought in those ancient wars, about the mistakes they made, and about the future that now hung in the balance. The world was holding its breath. Something was waking in the cold dark of space, and when it came, humanity would have to face it, and what it truly meant to be human. When the strange SOS signal was discovered, it wasn't just the scientists who became curious. Far away from the calm halls of research centers and space stations, there were places where secrets from the past were buried deep and tightly locked away. One of these was called the Black Vault, a hidden and highly secure facility where the most dangerous projects from humanity's past were kept under strict guard. Years ago, during the last great wars before humanity truly spread across the stars, many secret projects were started. These projects aimed to give an advantage in battle, to create weapons unlike anything ever seen before. But these weren't just machines or missiles. These were living beings, enhanced and engineered with technology that blurred the lines between man and something far more powerful. Some people called these beings war deities because of their strength and abilities. Others called them monsters. The most famous and feared of these creations was only known by a code name, Subject R9. Unlike others, R9 was successful in ways that shocked everyone. It was said to have ended an entire battle within a few hours, something no human army had ever done. But R9 wasn't just strong. It had intelligence, willpower, and a strange kind of awareness that made it impossible to control. After that battle, the people in charge tried to destroy R9, but nothing worked. The being could not be killed or stopped. Instead, it was put into a deep sleep, locked inside a prison pod and sent far away into the cold emptiness of space. It was forgotten, or so everyone thought. Decades passed and the world moved on. The wars ended, and humanity focused on rebuilding and exploring new worlds. But the Black Vault still held the secrets, hidden beneath layers of security and silence. Only a few people knew the full truth about what had been created and sent away. When the SOS signal appeared, it came from near the location where Subject R9's pod was sent long ago. The government immediately activated the Black Vault's emergency protocols. Officials reviewed classified files, looking back at interviews and journals from the time when these projects were still active. They pieced together what had happened, trying to understand what could have triggered the signal. The records showed that Subject R9 was more than just a weapon. It was a living being made with a mix of human DNA and advanced technology that gave it powers no one else had. It had the strength to destroy entire armies, the speed to move faster than any soldier, and the mind to plan and fight in ways no one could predict. But the records also showed something else. R9 had feelings. It remembered the wars it had fought, the destruction it had caused, and the pain of being locked away and abandoned. It was angry, yes, but also sorrowful. In its own way, it mourned the loss of humanity's innocence and the endless cycle of violence. The people who created R9 thought they were making a god to end wars, but they didn't realize that they were creating something that would never truly rest. The being was designed to fight forever. Now the SOS was a sign that R9 was waking up. At the same time, other groups were racing to reach the coordinates of the signal. These groups were very different from each other. Some were private companies looking to find and control the powerful being for their own purposes. Others were former military factions, soldiers who still believed in fighting for control of space. And then there was something else. A silent presence watching from a distance, something not human at all. This unknown force seemed to be waiting for the right moment to act, moving carefully and quietly. No one knew if it was friend or enemy, but everyone understood that it was dangerous. Meanwhile, the scientist who first discovered the signal felt both excitement and fear. She wanted to learn everything she could, but she also understood the risks. What if R9 was truly awake? What if it remembered the pain of its past? What if it came back angry and ready to fight? Despite the dangers, she was determined to be part of the team going to find the source of the signal. She knew that understanding R9 was important for all of humanity's future. The mission to reach the location in the Oort cloud was not easy. It required a special ship, equipped with the latest technology to protect against unknown threats. The crew was a mix of experienced veterans and scientists, all chosen for their skills and bravery. As the ship traveled deeper into space, the team prepared for what they might find. They studied old files and talked quietly about the stories they had heard. Many of the crew were haunted by the idea of R9, wondering if the stories were true or just legends. One member of the crew, a hardened former soldier, shared what he had learned from his grandfather, who had fought in the pre-migration wars. The soldier described R9 as a force of nature, unstoppable, terrifying but also strangely human in its pain. The scientist listened carefully. She realized that R9 was not just a machine or weapon, but a symbol of everything humanity had lost during the wars, and hope, trust, and the ability to live in peace. Days passed as the ship neared the coordinates. The silence of space weighed on everyone. Then they found it. The remains of the prison pod, broken and empty. Subject R9 was gone. The crew was stunned. How had it escaped? Was it nearby watching them? As they searched the area, strange things began to happen. Instruments on the ship started to glitch. Some crew members reported seeing shadows moving outside the windows. Others felt a sudden chill as if something unseen was present. The tension grew. The crew tried to stay calm, but the mystery of R9's disappearance made everyone nervous. Then, one night, the scientist woke up suddenly. She felt a strange presence in the ship's corridors. Stepping outside her cabin, she saw a figure standing at the far end of the hallway. Tall, powerful, but with a face that looked human. It was R9. The being did not speak at first. It looked at the scientist with eyes that held centuries of pain and loneliness. It seemed to understand that she was not an enemy. Slowly, R9 began to communicate. It shared memories of battles fought, of friends lost, and of the terrible loneliness of being locked away for so long. The scientist realized that R9 was not here to destroy, but to warn. The silent force watching from the shadows was real, an alien collection fleet that traveled the stars, gathering the weapons of dying civilizations to prevent any one power from rising again. R9 had been sent away to keep humanity safe, but now the collectors were here again, ready to take what they wanted. The scientist understood the danger. R9 was not just a weapon from the past. It was humanity's last hope against a threat that was far greater than anyone had imagined. As the crew prepared for the coming battle, the scientist and R9 formed an unlikely bond. She saw not a monster but a guardian, a being created from human fear and hope, now ready to protect the future. The story was far from over. The war deity was awake and its wrath was about to be unleashed. The moment they found the empty prison pod, the mood on the ship changed. Everyone knew that the being they had come for, Subject R9, was no longer locked away. It was out there somewhere close. The silence in space felt heavier, like the calm before a storm. No one could say exactly what R9 was like now. Would it be the uncontrollable force from the old stories? Or something else entirely? The crew tried to prepare, but deep down everyone felt the same uneasy question. Were they ready for what was coming? The scientist who first discovered the signal couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about what they might find. She kept wondering about R9's mind, its memories, its feelings. For years, R9 had been trapped in darkness and silence. What would it think of the world now? Then strange things started happening aboard the ship. Small things at first, an instrument that stopped working, a flicker of lights, an unexplained cold spot in a hallway. But these odd events grew more frequent. Some crew members reported seeing shadows out of the corner of their eyes. Others felt like they were being watched. Whispers of fear began to spread. People started asking if the ship was haunted or if something was trying to communicate. The scientist tried to calm everyone. She reminded them that space was full of strange signals and that their minds could play tricks on them. But even she couldn't deny the strange energy around the ship. One night she was walking through the ship's corridors when she suddenly stopped. There at the far end stood a figure, tall and strong but with a face that looked almost human. It didn't move or speak at first. It just watched her. It was R9. For a moment, the scientist was frozen in place. She felt a rush of emotions, fear, curiosity, and something she couldn't explain. This was no machine or monster. This was a being who had lived through centuries of pain and loss. R9 didn't speak, but the scientist could feel its thoughts, its memories flowing into her mind like a flood. She saw visions of battles raging across star systems, of destruction and fear. She saw loneliness trapped in a prison pod drifting in the cold dark of space. Slowly, the being stepped closer. The scientist reached out and touched its hand. It was warm, almost human. In that moment, she understood something important. R9 wasn't just a weapon. It was a mirror reflecting humanity's greatest fears and hopes. Days passed and R9 became part of the crew. It did not trust them easily, and the crew struggled to trust it. But as they worked together, they learned more about the threat waiting nearby. The alien collectors were real, powerful beings who traveled the universe, taking the weapons of civilizations that were dying or rising too fast. They believed that no one species should grow too strong. Their goal was to keep the galaxy balanced by removing anything that could cause too much destruction. R9 had been sent into deep space to protect humanity from these collectors. But now the collectors had found them again. They were sending a fleet to capture R9 and any other weapons they could find. The crew knew that a battle was coming, and they had little time to prepare. The scientist worked closely with R9 to understand its abilities and weaknesses. They studied the ancient technology that had created it and searched for a way to protect the ship and the people on board. R9 was powerful, but it didn't want to fight unless it had to. It remembered the destruction it caused in the past and feared losing control again. The scientists saw the conflict inside it, a desire for peace mixed with a readiness to fight. The crew practiced emergency drills, tested their weapons, and prepared for the worst. They didn't know if they could win, but they were determined to try. The fate of humanity might depend on this strange being they barely understood. One night, as the ship moved through the cold silence of space, the warning alarms suddenly blared. The alien fleet had arrived. The sky outside the ship was filled with strange ships glowing with unfamiliar lights. The crew could feel the tension in the air. R9 stood on the bridge, calm and ready. The battle began. R9 moved with speed and skill that amazed the crew. It dodged blasts that would have destroyed any ship and fought off attacks with precision and power. The aliens were powerful, but R9 was something else, a force of nature born from humanity's darkest days. The scientist watched in awe and fear. She saw the destruction caused by R9's wrath. She saw the fear in the eyes of her fellow crew members. But she also saw something else, a protector fighting to keep humanity alive. As the battle raged on, the crew realized that they were not just fighting for their lives. They were fighting for the future of all humanity. If R9 fell, the collectors would come to Earth next. In the heat of the battle, the scientist spoke to R9, asking it why it fought. Its answer was simple but powerful. "I was born to end wars," it said, "but I was never meant to live in peace." The words echoed in the silent corridors of the ship. They were a reminder of the price humanity had paid for creating something so powerful. Despite the danger, the crew stood together. They fought alongside R9, learning to trust the being that once was just a legend. The battle ended with the alien fleet retreating, but everyone knew this was only the beginning. The collectors would return, stronger and more determined. R9 and the crew set a course back to Earth. The world they left behind was unprepared for what was coming. The scientists knew that their journey was far from over. She looked at R9 and saw not a weapon, but a reminder of humanity's strength and weakness. The being was a reflection of their past and a guardian of their future. The story of the last war deity was just beginning, and the wrath it carried was about to change everything. After the alien fleet retreated, the ship carrying R9 and the crew began its journey back toward Earth. The victory was small, a temporary relief rather than a final win. Everyone on board knew that the threat had only grown stronger, and the collectors would be back. They always came back. The scientist sat quietly in her small cabin, thinking about what lay ahead. She looked at the stars outside the window, silent, distant, beautiful. For so long, humans had looked at the sky with hope, dreaming of new worlds and new lives. But now the sky held a shadow made of war and fear. R9 sat nearby, calm but distant. It was different from the stories she had heard, more complex than a simple weapon of destruction. It carried memories, regrets, and a strange sense of duty. It had seen the worst of humanity, but it still wanted to protect what was left. The crew gathered to plan their next steps. The government back on Earth had already been informed, but only a few trusted officials knew the full story. The scientists knew that the world wasn't ready for the truth, not yet. People still believed that wars were things of the past, that humanity had moved on from its violent history, but the past had a way of catching up. The Black Vault was reopened in secret. The files and records from the pre-migration wars were studied with new urgency. Experts debated how to deal with the collectors and what role R9 could play. Some wanted to control the being, to use it as a weapon once more. Others feared that bringing R9 back could spark another war, one far worse than before. The scientist argued for a different path. She believed that R9 wasn't a tool to be used or a monster to be feared. It was a guardian, a protector born from humanity's darkest moments but capable of great good. If they could understand it, maybe they could learn from it. Meanwhile, R9 spent hours in quiet reflection. It studied the crew, learning about the new world it was returning to. Technology had changed and people had changed, but war, it realized, was still a part of human nature. One day a message came from Earth. A new threat had been detected, not alien, but human. Some factions on Earth had learned about the collectors and the power of R9. They saw an opportunity to gain control, to become the strongest force in the solar system. The scientist felt a chill. The wars of the past were returning, this time with new enemies and old fears. It was a reminder that humanity's greatest challenge was not the stars, but themselves. The ship prepared for a secret meeting with representatives from Earth's governments. The goal was to find a way to unite against the collectors and the new threats. But old rivalries and distrust made the talks difficult. R9 watched the humans argue and fight over power and control. It felt a deep sadness. The being knew what war could do, how it destroyed not only bodies but souls. The scientist stepped forward, speaking with a quiet strength. She told the leaders about R9's history, about the cost of the pre-migration wars, and about the danger the collectors posed. She urged them to work together, to see beyond their differences. Her words were met with silence at first. Then slowly, some began to listen. They realized that if humanity didn't unite, they would be easy prey for the collectors and any other threats lurking in the darkness. Plans were made to build defenses, to share technology, and to prepare for what might come. R9 agreed to help, but only on its own terms. It would not be controlled or commanded. It was a being with its own will, born from the past but choosing its own future. As the days passed, the crew grew closer to R9. They shared stories, hopes, and fears. They saw that beneath the powerful exterior was something deeply human, a desire for connection and understanding. The scientist and R9 formed a strong bond. They learned from each other, bridging the gap between past and present, machine and human. But the peace was fragile. One night, the ship's alarms blared again. A new signal had been detected, this time closer to Earth. The collectors were returning, bringing more ships and greater power. The crew prepared for another battle, knowing that this fight would be even harder, but they were ready to face it, united by hope and the belief that humanity could survive and grow stronger. The scientist looked at R9 and saw not just a weapon, but a symbol of everything humanity could be, flawed but resilient, broken but hopeful. The story of the last war Deity was far from over. The wrath it carried was a warning, a challenge, and a promise. The future depended on the choices they made next. After the new alert came in, the crew knew things were about to get even more serious. The alien collectors were not just a threat in space anymore. They were moving closer to Earth, and this time they were stronger and better prepared. The ship's atmosphere changed from cautious hope to urgent determination. The scientist and R9 worked side by side, trying to figure out the best way to protect Earth. They spent long hours studying the alien technology, trying to find weaknesses or ways to fight back. Even though R9 was incredibly powerful, the threat was too big for any one being or ship to handle alone. The crew held regular meetings, sharing ideas and fears. Some members were scared, others angry. They all wanted to protect their home but felt the weight of the challenge ahead. It wasn't just about weapons or technology anymore. It was about survival and what it meant to be human in the face of such danger. R9 showed a side that many hadn't seen before. It was patient and calm, but also deeply thoughtful. It reminded the crew that violence wasn't the answer. The being believed that understanding the enemy and finding peaceful solutions when possible were just as important as fighting. The scientist admired this side of R9. She thought about the wars it had fought long ago and how much pain and loss it must have carried. She realized that beneath the power and the fear, there was a hope for something better, a chance for peace. One day, they received a message from Earth's leaders. A special council was being formed, made up of the most trusted and skilled people from around the world. Their job was to decide how to handle the coming war and how to prepare humanity for the fight. The scientist was invited to join. She accepted, knowing the importance of her role. She would speak for R9, for the crew, and for all the people who wanted peace but were ready to fight if they had to. The council meetings were tense. Different countries argued over resources, strategies, and who should lead. Old rivalries and distrust still ran deep. But the scientist spoke clearly and honestly, sharing what she had learned from R9 and the crew. She urged the council to focus on what mattered most, protecting life and building a future, not just winning battles. Slowly, the leaders began to listen. They saw that if humanity didn't come together, they would be defeated. They needed to work as one. Meanwhile, the alien fleet continued to grow. Strange signals were picked up, strange ships seen near the edges of the solar system. The pressure on the crew and R9 increased every day. The scientist spent time talking with R9 about its past. She learned that before it became a weapon, it had been a person, someone who wanted to protect, to heal, to create. But the wars had changed it, forced it to become something else. Now it wanted to find its own path, not just follow orders or fight endlessly. R9 shared memories of its early days, of the friends it had lost, and of the terrible decisions it had been forced to make. It told the scientist how it had once tried to stop the war but had only made it worse. It feared repeating those mistakes. The scientist comforted R9, reminding it that the future was not set. Every choice they made now could change everything. Together, they could find a way to break the cycle of violence. As the alien ships approached, the crew prepared for battle once again. But this time, something was different. They were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for hope. R9 led the charge with power and precision, but it also protected the crew and the ships around it. The battle was fierce and long, pushing everyone to their limits. During the fight, the scientist noticed something strange. The alien ships were not just attacking, they were searching for something. It was as if they were trying to find a way to communicate, or perhaps understand humanity. R9 used this to their advantage. It reached out, sending signals back through space, trying to connect with the alien fleet on a different level. To everyone's surprise, the alien ships paused. A moment of silence filled the void of space. Then, a message came through, an offer for dialogue. The crew and the scientist knew this was their chance. Instead of endless fighting, there might be a way to make peace, to find a new path. R9 agreed to meet, to speak with the leaders of the alien fleet. The scientist volunteered to accompany it, knowing the risks but also the importance. The meeting was tense. The alien leaders were ancient and powerful, their voices cold but curious. They explained their mission to keep balance in the galaxy, to prevent any one species from growing too strong and causing destruction. The scientist and R9 shared humanity's story, its wars, its pain, and its hope for peace. They spoke honestly about mistakes and dreams for a better future. Slowly, the alien leaders began to understand. They saw that humanity was still young, still learning, but ready to change. An agreement was made, not a peace treaty, but a promise to work together. The collectors would watch and protect, but they would also help humanity grow stronger and wiser. The crew returned to their ship, feeling a mix of relief and hope. They had faced the wrath of war and come through with a chance for something new. The scientist looked at R9 and smiled. The being was no longer just a weapon or a war deity. It was a symbol of humanity's ability to rise above its darkest moments and choose a better path. The journey ahead would still be difficult. There would be challenges, struggles, and sacrifices. But now there was hope. Together they would face the future. The promise made between humanity and the alien collectors felt like a new beginning. For the first time in a long time, there was hope that peace could exist alongside power, that understanding could grow even in the darkest corners of space. But hope is not a simple thing. It needs care, patience, and courage to grow. The crew aboard the ship carrying R9 knew this better than anyone. They had seen the worst of war and the weight of fear. Now they faced a new challenge, building a future where such destruction would not happen again. As the ship moved closer to Earth, the scientist looked out into the vast blackness of space. The stars twinkled gently like distant promises. She thought about the long journey, how far they had come and how much farther they still needed to go. R9 sat beside her, quiet but not distant. It was no longer just a war machine or a legend of wrath. It was something more, an ally, a guardian, and perhaps a reminder of what humanity could become. When they arrived back at Earth, the world had already begun to change. People were more aware of the dangers beyond their planet, and they were beginning to prepare, not just for war, but for cooperation. The councils continued their work, building stronger ties between nations and preparing defenses. But they also worked on education, on building trust, and on sharing knowledge. The idea was simple but powerful. If humanity could learn from its past, it could avoid repeating it. R9 was given a place among the people, not as a weapon to be controlled, but as a symbol of the past and a guide for the future. The being walked among humans, learning from them and teaching in return. The scientist watched this transformation with hope. She saw how people began to understand that strength was not just about power or weapons, but about compassion, trust, and cooperation. There were still challenges. Some groups feared R9, worried about what it might do or represent. Old fears die hard, and not everyone was ready to accept a being born from war as a friend. But over time, as R9 helped with disasters, protected communities, and worked to heal wounds, both physical and emotional, people began to change their minds. The scientist often spoke about R9's story, about the mistakes of the past and the lessons learned. She reminded everyone that the being was not a god or a monster, but a reflection of humanity itself, flawed, but capable of growth. Together, they worked on new projects, exploring peaceful uses of the technologies developed during the wars. Energy systems that could power whole cities without harm, medical advances that saved lives, and communication tools that brought people closer. R9 became a teacher in many ways, showing that even something born in destruction could become a force for good. As years passed, the scientist grew older, but her belief in the future never wavered. She knew the story of R9 and the collectors would be told for generations, a story of war, fear, hope, and the power of choice. One day, as she sat with R9 watching a sunset, she asked the being what it hoped for now. R9 looked at the fading light and said softly, "I hope for a time when I am no longer needed. When humanity can protect itself with wisdom, not wrath. When peace is stronger than fear." The scientist smiled, tears in her eyes. "That day will come," she said, "because people like you remind us what we can be." The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with colors of promise. The story of the last war deity was no longer just about wrath and destruction. It was about hope, healing, and a future waiting to be written. And with that hope, humanity stepped forward, ready to face whatever came next together.